Welcome to all of you to the fourth edition of the Times Techies webinars. Times Techies is a page in the Times of India that we started a year ago. In fact, it's almost exactly a year. It was June 12th last year that we started. It's a page for and by India's technology professionals, engineers, engineering students. We write about the amazing work Indian techies do for the world. We write about new trends in technology, new opportunities in India for engineers, about programming languages that are becoming important. We talk to professors in IITs and other top engineering institutions on emerging trends. We started Times Techies webinars recently, and today we are in the fourth of the series. A lot of our focus has been on skilling and learning and new opportunities because that's what most of our readers and viewers look for. Today we have Maneesh Sharma. He's the country manager for GitHub in India. GitHub, I'm sure most of you would have heard of. Founded in 2008, it's become one of the world's leading software development platforms. Globally, some 50 million developers build and use software on GitHub. For GitHub, India is the third largest developer community after the US and China, and I'm sure Manish will talk more about that. Manish, prior to joining GitHub, was responsible for driving Adobe's strategy, business operations, and partner ecosystem in India. He has also run the platform business at SAP India as the head of products and solutions. And he was involved with developer communities during a stint with Sun Microsystems. Manish is an avid reader. In 2005, he founded India's first online book library called bookmeabook.com. He was just telling us that it's still live. Manish holds an MBA degree from IIM Bangalore and a BE in Electronics and Communications from NIT Surat. Manish lives in Delhi, and that's where he's speaking from today. And in his spare time, he enjoys retro video games and playing his guitar collection. Manish, over to you.
Thank you, Sujit. Hello, everybody. Appreciate the welcome. I'm super excited to be here. Let me just get my presentation up. Give me 1 second. Great. Hi. I'm sure you can see my screen now.
Visible, Manish.
Thank you. So as Sujit mentioned, I'm coming live to you from my home here in Delhi. I was having a conversation right now and telling the team that I shuttle between Bangalore and Delhi. I'm based out of Bangalore. That's where I engage with my colleagues and the community. And I was here home in Delhi 2 days before the lockdown. I was supposed to fly back. And given what was going on, I just canceled my tickets and been happily grounded in my home with my family. And that's where I'm coming to you live from. So super excited to talk about what GitHub has been doing globally and what we're going to be doing here in India as we've launched a couple of months back. The topic that I wanted to talk to you all about today was open source and how it's driving an interconnected community. It's a topic that I'm super passionate about. I've been involved with the open source community for a very, very long time. Way back in Sun, as Sujit was mentioning, used to work with a lot of the open source projects here in India. And I think it's taken significant strides over the last few years from an adoption perspective. And that's what I wanted to start off with. Open source has a lot of meanings for a lot of people. It's free open source software you can download and use, etc. But the way you look at it, whenever anybody is developing a software project today, 80 to 90% of that code is actually coming in from open source. The secret sauce is only about 10 to 15% that an organization or a developer is putting on top of it to make it special, right? And this is significant, right? Nobody is now starting off and saying, okay, let me develop a library for monitoring logs, or let me write a function that will create an authentication module. We don't do that anymore. A lot of these libraries are available in the open ecosystem, and you actually start importing them, inheriting them into your code. And it just accelerates the software development life cycle for everybody. And this, in my view, is a significant impact that open source has had in the overall software industry. And each of you, I'm sure, you could be writing code in Python, you could be writing code in Java, C++, could be anything. And this is a typical thing that you would do when you start off your project, right? You would start importing libraries. Now, when you're doing that, you are not only importing libraries, you're actually importing a huge team to be a part of your software project. Because if, for example, what you see on this slide, Kiwi Solver might be a library, but there might be about 20 to 30 people in the open source ecosystem who are maintaining that library. So whatever functionality that they change, or bugs that they fix, or upgrades that they provide, is having a significant impact on the code that you are developing. And you get to benefit from all of these new improvements as and when the community keeps adding to their packages. And this is a complete different way of how software is getting developed now. Our CEO always talks about software development is the world's largest team sport. You have hundreds of developers who are collaborating and creating new software, new innovation. And if you go out and talk to people, this is typically how they think about a software developer, an individual who would be sitting all alone on his cubicle or her cubicle, keying away on their keyboard, some code, having pizza or a dosa or something like that. Whereas in fact, it's actually what we call an interconnected community. So the open source ecosystem is all about collaborating with teams across the globe in improving software, maintaining software, and taking it forward. You might have a small idea of a framework that you want to develop, and as soon as you go on into the community and open source your code, you'll be surprised that there are thousands of people who would love to contribute to that idea of yours, to make it better, to improve it, and to also start using your idea in their projects as well. And that's what we love about the open source ecosystem. Right? This concept of collaboration and the interconnected community. These days, open source contributions are actually coming from everywhere across the globe. This is a visualization which I love. These are commits to open source projects from every part of the world happening on GitHub. You can clearly see India shining bright. I love to see that. There are hundreds, if not thousands of software developers in India who are contributing to open source projects globally, as well as creating projects from India as well. And this is the real change that we're seeing in the ecosystem. People are starting to share more code out and invite collaborators to work on it with them. I thought I will share with you a couple of statistics. As Sujit was mentioning, we've recently launched in India. We are 50 million strong globally on the platform, of which India has the third largest contribution after the US and China. And every year in November, we actually come out with a report called the State of the Octoverse. I'm sure you know our mascot, Mona, and Octacat. That's how we derive the name Octoverse. And we had 22% growth year on year last November on the developers in India. And that's a significant number. If you look at the base of 40 to 50 million developers at that time, 22% growth from India is significant. I've always been passionate about the India ecosystem and what India has to offer. By 2024, India will actually be the largest software developer market in the world. And I'm sure all of you can see it. The choice of a lot of students and engineers who are going into computer science, every organization that is transforming into a digital organization. We're having disruption in every industry with born digital companies coming out. Software developers in India are really in a very interesting spot as far as the growth of India is concerned. The other point that I was very overwhelmed to see that there was a 75% increase in the public repository. And I'm sure those of you who've been working on GitHub or have worked on GitHub would know, public repositories are the way you start sharing code. So year on year, we actually saw a 75% growth in open source projects from India. Again, just goes to show how people are starting to contribute, starting to collaborate with developers within India and across the world as well. Sujit mentioned we're number 3. My personal goal as we've started GitHub is to make it number 1. So I want India to be the largest contributor on GitHub. Given the demographic, given the number of developers we have in India, it's no surprise that I'm sure that I will be getting there. We've actually stated publicly that by 2025, we want to get to 100 million developers on the platform. So from 50 to 100 million in the next 5 years. And I can tell you that India would be the most significant contributor for GitHub to get to this 100 million, and which is why I'm super excited about what I've been doing here in India, and privileged to be a part of this journey in the ecosystem. I know there are many of you on the call today who've taken time to join, and you would be having questions. Okay, but how does that impact me? What open source is happening, but what do I do about it? So I wanted to take the next 10 minutes talking about what we're seeing as trends and what are we working with enterprises on. This is a statement I just love. I talk about this with virtually everybody I meet. Every company on the planet is becoming a software company. There is no industry, there is no segment across the world which is not impacted by software. There was a research that was done last year on LinkedIn that last year automobile companies hired more software engineers than they did mechanical engineers. Right? And this is a transformation that we're going through today as well, with digital transformation, with new companies coming that are born digital, who are disrupting traditional industries and forcing everybody to look at software and technology as a differentiator in the market. And everything is getting reimagined. How customers how organizations are engaging with their customers, how organizations engage with suppliers, partners, everything is getting reimagined with the disruption that technology and software bringing. And that is the opportunity that we see. And there are a few trends that also point towards, what software developers should think about as they're going through this process of, what kind of skills should I look at? What is the industry looking for? How are customers responding to this change of becoming a software company? The most significant one, and this you would relate to it when, for example, I started coding decades ago. I like to call it last century. So you can imagine how old I am. The whole process of software development was very different. You had, waterfall model of software development where you had different teams who, from a sequential perspective would take over code, review it, test it, deploy it. But in today's world, to respond to, customer needs and challenges in the market, we're seeing that the software development cycles are at least 7 times faster than 10 years ago. And I come from a world which is 20 plus years ago. And this is changing the way how software is getting developed itself. I'm sure you've heard of the term DevOps. DevOps is becoming a critical strategy of how engineering teams collaborate with each other and create software faster for the market. I talked about this before. 80 to 90% of projects are actually using open source. So what that just means is it's very important for everybody to be aware of all the libraries, the projects that are there, whether you're working on deployments in Kubernetes, whether you're working on Docker, TensorFlow, Ansible, So these are the technologies that are being used in modern applications by customers and organizations. So it's a central point. So open source is not something which is sitting on the side and being used by research institutions. It's actually core to what organizations are doing. And this goes back to the first point which I just made, right? If you have to release software faster, if you have to innovate faster, you have to reuse, right? So the whole concept of discovering software that is already available for you to reuse in your project is very critical. And open source sits at the center of this whole gear, making and creating things to move them forward. I love that 500 million, number. This is something that IDC actually came out on a report on, that over the next 5 years, we're going to have 500 million new applications created. And this is greater than all the applications put together over the last 40 years. I think it's a phenomenal opportunity for a software developer. With so much happening in digital transformation, in people moving forward in the new digital age, it's a great opportunity for everybody to be able to contribute. And cloud is actually what is accelerating this whole process, right? So the 500 million applications that I talked about are predominantly going to be deployed on cloud. And this actually ties to all these points that you see on the screen. It's cloud provides for a very agile development that accelerates this whole process, the process of reuse, the process of testing, the process of deployment, and most of all, the process of consumption. So these are actually, the key trends that is impacting every industry and customer out there. And as you think through, what you should be working on and how you should be skilling yourself, it's across the board. And that takes me to languages as well. A lot of people always come back and say, which language should I be learning? What should I be doing? This is a good example. So in that same Octoverse report that we came out with last November, Python actually overtook Java for the first time. And this is quite funny. I would love to share one, personal story here. I used to write Python code many years ago. I used to write Python code to test web proxy systems and SMS gateways. And when Java came along in Sun, I actually became the Java ambassador. So I was going out and talking about Java, J2E to developers in the India and the Asia Pac market. So I actually gave up Python to start developing in Java. So when I saw this report last year, I sort of chuckled to myself that a language that I had given up so many decades ago has overtaken the language that I gave it up for. So this is a very interesting trend. JavaScript is a language that modern apps are using. And JavaScript is also a very great example. So I'm sure all of you are using NPM, which is now a part of GitHub, for inheriting a lot of the packages that are out there. And again, it's all open source. All of these packages have been put out into the community for everybody to consume. Now, the main thing about software development is everybody, individually, you get to choose, right? So you don't have to be forced into a language or a technology or a platform. And that's partly why everybody, all the developers love going to GitHub. The platform is tool agnostic, it's language agnostic, it is cloud agnostic, it is tool agnostic. So for a developer, it becomes a sort of a place to explore, experiment, and choose what they're comfortable in developing. So I would love to wait for later this year when we come out with the Octoverse report on what are the trends we're seeing from a language perspective. I also sort of double clicked into the report to just look at what are the popular projects in India. And one thing that stood out was Flutter. I've talked about it a lot, but this was not surprising. Those of you who know Flutter, it's a framework that helps in UI and mobile design. For a country like India, where all applications today are thought about as mobile first, it was no surprise that Flutter was actually, one of the top frameworks that is being consumed in the Indian ecosystem. So these are some trends that we're seeing. Again, we will come back to you as we release the report for this year. I'm counting on a lot of community contributions from India to have a significant impact in this report. Sujit and Shilpa were also telling me that we have a lot of students on the call. So, I thought I will put up a slide to actually talk about the program in GitHub, which I just love. This is, you hear me whenever you meet me to talk about GitHub education all the time. This is a program that we created many, many years ago to help the next generation of software developers get into coding. So, and we created multiple programs for it, but more importantly, we actually created a separate product. So GitHub Classroom is something that we work with colleges, universities, and schools to provide them with special tools that help teachers teach their students how to code. Stuff like how do you grade assignments in code, how do you review code for your class, etc. So these are tools which we've given to institutions. And there's a very special component here, which is called the GitHub Student Pack. So for those of you who are in schools and colleges who are attending today, I would urge you to go on to education.github.com and apply for a GitHub Student Pack. All of this is completely free, but what the GitHub Student Pack gives uniquely to you as a student is a set of 100 tools. It's not only GitHub, but a lot of the partner tools that are available for you for free, as long as you are a student, right? And it's a $250,000 to $300,000 value for you. So there are, apart from GitHub, you have credits available for AWS, for Azure, for GitKraken, for Stripe, if you want to play around with Stripe. And the reason we put together these tools to give you as a student, as I mentioned, this helps you explore, right? What do you want to experiment with? And you're not constrained by going into 10 different places to discover tools. GitHub becomes your source code repository, which you can use to start developing. And I'm sure all of you have created a GitHub page. The GitHub handle is something that is increasingly being used by recruiters to see what kind of code you've been writing. So a typical resume actually gives a good idea of the languages that you work on, frameworks that you work on, or projects that you would have done. But when somebody goes into your GitHub profile, they get a very good view of the kind of code that you've been working on, the different community projects that you've been contributing to. So as a student, the more you participate in hackathons, the more you start contributing to projects, because that's a learning process for you as well, it starts to build up on your profile. And when you walk into a lot of customers, you will find that they also use GitHub for their DevOps. So it's just a continuation of your profile and your skill sets that becomes a good indicator for recruiters on what your profile is. Just to add, over the last few months, when we've launched in India, we've set up a grant of $1,000 for the first time hackathons that an institution will run. And this is very important. Hackathon is something that everybody talks about. It's a big craze, but when it comes to an institute, they always scratch their head. How should I execute it? How do I invite people? How do I manage this whole process? So we've partnered with Major League Hack that on behalf of GitHub goes and works with these institutions to help them launch hackathons. Also with the COVID pandemic that the whole world is going through, we also launched a few initiatives. Like on the 15th, we're doing a virtual graduation ceremony for software developers. So we put a program out there a couple of weeks back that whoever is graduating from a software course can actually participate in a virtual graduation that GitHub is going to do for everybody. So those are exciting ways of keeping the student community engaged and giving them a view of what's happening in the professional world and how they can leverage. Which brings me, to a very interesting and important topic, which is, COVID-19. Yes, a lot of things have been impacted globally for every organization, but we are humbled and inspired to see the open collaboration that is happening on GitHub related to COVID-19. So across the world, on last count, there were more than 3,500 projects related to COVID-19 that are running on GitHub. And this engagement, these projects are actually coming from all walks of life. You have governments, you have research associations, you have academic institutions, you have enterprises, and even individual communities that have come together to open source so many projects related to COVID-19. It could be, a data set related to a particular country's response to COVID-19. It could be models like the Oxford study, which is available on GitHub, or the John Hopkins data that is also available on GitHub. And closer home, I'm sure you've seen many COVID-19 projects from India that had come up as soon as the pandemic started. And it just goes to show the power of GitHub, because it's an open platform. It's open for anybody to bring their code and start collaborating and leverage the tools that has been built. And what I talked about in the previous slides, the time to market, or the acceleration of software development, is what open source provides. So the fact that within a couple of days, a lot of these projects were spun up and had contributors coming in from all over the world in developing this and providing it to citizens is just overwhelming, right? It really, really does give a lot of inspiration to us that we are part of the community and providing tools that helps make every developer's life a lot easier. I promise you, this is my last slide. I've been talking for a long time. It feels weird just to be looking at a screen and talking. But there are a lot of projects that are on GitHub. Whether you are a student, whether you are a software developer, I would urge you to explore. You might have different passions. You might be interested in looking at 3D projects related code. You might be interested in AI. You might be interested in just spinning up projects on Raspberry Pi. There are lots of interesting products and projects there. One of them, which we recently showcased in Satellite, was Sonic, which is code which sort of creates music. So you can actually use code to create different sounds and create a DJ-like experience using code. So I would really urge you to go and explore projects, see what you like, engage with the community, connect with your peers. It's the connections is not only about contribution to open source. You'll connect with different people. You'll find like-minded people. I was very, very, very excited to hear from one of the developers in India a couple of weeks back when I was talking to him, that he got the job that he's in via hackathon. So he was working on an open source project, and they had organized a hackathon which he participated in, and that led him to get a job in the same company. So there are lots of avenues that might open up. I think it's what I would say is pursue your passion. Keep learning on what technology is getting released. At GitHub, we will continue to release features and products that make your life easy so that you can innovate faster. Just to give one example, we released in beta a product called Codespaces, which is all about not only coding in the browser, but from the browser in the IDE itself, how can you spin up virtual environments for testing your code, for running configurations and deployments, right? All of you, I'm sure, in your day-to-day life have struggled with setting up different configurations for a web server or a database environment, running CI/CD pipelines. So we realize how we can help you in addressing these issues, and that's where we keep developing features on GitHub to make your life easy. So that's, a quick overview of, what we've been doing at GitHub. I'm super excited to share all of this with you. You're part of the reason why GitHub exists. Our job is to help you code, help you innovate, and help you connect with communities across the world. With that, I would hand it back to Sujit.
Thank you so much, Manish. That slide share, can you stop that slide share, Manish?
Yes, I'm just struggling with multiple
wonderful. And the community sounds so exciting. Even when we talk to, I'm sure GitHub is going to do extremely well in India. Whenever we talk to any IIT professor, he says, obviously computer science is by far the most preferred subject. The moment they introduce an AI or ML kind of course, everybody from other streams also want to do exactly that. Even on our pages, anything around Python, React, Kubernetes, these are by far the most read stories on the page. So I'm sure you are going to do extremely well here. I just had a little clarification on this. Now, if somebody's, there are two things I wanted to say, which I should have said right at the beginning. One, my colleague Shilpa is there with me, and she will also be asking questions. And the other is to the viewers, please send in your questions on FB Live. We will ask Manish those questions. So my question to you, Manish, is now if I want to submit some code on one of the projects on open source. Who decides? How is it decided that, okay, my code is going to be accepted and it's going to be used as part of a project?
So GitHub doesn't decide, first of all. You can go online and you can open source your code. Whoever comes and looks at that code actually decides whether they want to use it or not. Right? That's the whole power of the community. Nobody is forcing anybody to use code.
Okay.
So what we do provide from a GitHub perspective is a lot of security features. Right? So to make sure that whatever code is available on GitHub, if there are any CVEs, which is security vulnerabilities. So these are tools which we've introduced to make sure that developers use those tools to have bug-free software, etc. But to answer your question, it is for the community, by the community, to the community. They decide.
If there's an open source project already going on, and I think my code will fit in well there, how do I communicate that to the people who are doing that project?
Great question. So again, there is a process, right? So in software development, as you're creating code and contributing back into a project, there are lots of checks and balances that are required. You might be breaking somebody else's code. It's a technical term, but you might be breaking the whole project itself. So when you are submitting a change into an open source project or even a private project that somebody's working on, you actually do what we call as a pull request. So you're actually telling the maintainer of the project that, hey, I'm suggesting a change. You were doing things this way, but I think it could be done better this way. And then, it's a process of community code review. Other people will also comment, yes, I think it's better. Maybe you should modify this code. And once all of that is agreed upon, it gets merged into the main branch, right? So again, it's a collaborative process. And that's the beauty of the whole development life cycle. As I said, it's a team sport. So just because you said it is great, right, it doesn't mean it's great. There would be others who would help you tweak it. Maybe they accept it as it is. So it becomes a more collaborative process for the community to work on software development.
That's a great term, world's largest team sport. Shilpa, go ahead.
Yeah, Manish, you mentioned about how you've seen a 75% growth in public repositories, which means more and more projects are getting created in India. That's incredibly exciting. If you can talk about some of the trending repositories.
So there are lots of open source products that have come out of India, which are being used globally. To name a few, there is a project called Frappe, which is, an open source ERP coming out of India. There is a project called Begisto, which is an e-commerce platform. There's a project called Caliber, which is a management of ebooks software. So there are many such products that have come out of India. One of my key goals that I have set for myself is to go out and find more open source projects that might be being worked on in research institutions and get them to the public. Right? So the platform actually enables people to share it with a larger community. So I've been having conversations with lots of developers who come and tell me, oh, I've created this framework on R that I want to share with the ML community. And those are the teams that we want to help and bring their software onto the open source community.
All right. Can you also give us some color on the private repositories, where developers have access to, private development environments? How is that shaping up here?
Well, private repositories is also, shaping up well, because that's the biggest driver of, us wanting to create a startup, right? So for example, if you and I want to create a media startup, we can immediately go and create a private repository, start coding. So I think a private repository is a great example of how people are starting to create commercial software. And this is a big driver for enterprises as well, because enterprises obviously exist to monetize what they're doing. So the creating private repositories for their internal teams, right, to collaborate on in a distributed way to create applications is a great driver. And that also helps, when you think about remote work, for having a distributed team from across the world to start working on your private projects, whether these are employees that are distributed, or it could even be partners. As you can imagine, system integrators and developers, they can come and contribute to your project. So private repositories is a great way for enterprises also to start working on this distributed way.
Manish, you mentioned 99% of projects use open source. So practically everybody uses some open source code from somewhere and integrates into whatever work they're doing, is it?
Yes, absolutely. So, that first slide, that animated slide which I had, which wrote the code import. So import's the way where you would start using libraries. And more often than not, all of these imports are from open source libraries. You might be using something from Apache, you might be using some other libraries from the open source ecosystem. And that's how you're inheriting open source code in your projects.
You have to acknowledge make any acknowledgement or anything when you use those codes?
Not really. So there are different, licensing mechanisms, right? Many of these are for use as is. You don't have to make your code open source just by using those libraries. So a lot of these are available on the platform itself. By the way, I'll share a link with the team. GitHub has actually put up a page to help developers understand the impact of different open source licensing.
Well,
Hi, Manish. While tracking COVID, one of the most popular projects also happens to be covid19india.org on GitHub. So if you can give us some insights on, how many developers are contributing to it, what is the nature of the projects that you see on this platform?
Couple of points here. So the first is, it's an independent project that's being run by the community. So apart from, GitHub as a platform being available for them to come and start collaborating, I'm not involved much on that. Second, and that's the beauty of the platform. If you go to the COVID-19 India page on GitHub, so when you open covidindia19.org, there is a link that they've put up with the GitHub repository. So once you go into that GitHub page, you can actually see the total number of developers, what's the code, who's contributed last, who's the most active developer. So all of that is actually open. So in real time, you can actually see what is going on in the project. So it's not a data that we keep private. It's open for anybody to go and see. To be honest with you, I haven't checked it, but when I go online, I can share the stats with you.
Sure. Thanks.
Anish, this is a question from viewer Meenakshi. Can you throw some light on data science projects and the community on GitHub?
So, Python, the trend that I was talking about, people are starting to use a lot of the Python scripts and code and R code that are being starting to put up on GitHub. There are some specifics around, data sciences that is still work in progress that we'll be releasing in the near future. So apart from having a lot of this code available from these different libraries of Python and R, there are contributions that are coming in from research institutions who are opening up a lot of the data models. So if you look at the COVID-19 data models, they're all models that have been created on data science that have been open sourced by these institutions. So you will find a lot of the models and codes related to data science being available on GitHub already.
Manish,
thank you.
Hi, we have a question from one of our viewers, Divya. She wants to know if, when you spoke about many companies becoming software companies, do developers also need domain expertise besides, technical knowledge?
That's a very good question. I think it's a mixed answer. So from a development perspective, there are different roles. There are software engineers, there are DevOps engineers. So the engineering team actually has diverse roles. So when you're developing your career to become a business analyst, your role is actually to break down the requirements that would come from the teams or the business and translate it into technology. That role definitely would need a lot of exposure to the domain so that you're able to not only break down the requirements, but think through for a particular industry what the impact of technology could be. So for example, if you're in auto, right, you can think through a lot of connected car related concepts and how that applies to how the automobile industry works, right? How the automobile industry works in engaging with insurance providers. So when you're thinking through connected cars, the data that is being created in the car using technology can then be shared with the insurance agencies to decide on premium. For example, that's a business domain thought that the business analyst would do. But the engineering team that's working on the connected car would actually work on the nitty-gritty of the software, on how do you make a certain thing work in a certain way. That's more technical, and that would require in-depth tech knowledge. So it's very difficult to become a jack of all trades. Specialization in a particular stream has become very important. And we're seeing engineering teams also breaking down into different roles as well. What I talked about as DevOps, right? So organizations now have very specific teams that just work on DevOps. So their role would be, how do they look at managing tools, infrastructure, CI/CD deployments to automate the entire engineering cycle, right? And then you will have software developers who are developing code, then you would have software testers, etc. So a team sport, Sujit, as I was talking about, if you look at a football game, you have a striker, you have a defender, you have a goalkeeper. So every team has different roles, and that's true for software engineering as well.
Manish, I had this question from Thomas. As a front-end developer, how can I leverage open source projects on GitHub?
I talked about Flutter as one of the examples. So if you're front-end developer developing UI, UX applications, you would be using a lot of these libraries. I spoke about NPM. So all the JavaScript, I'm sure you're using JavaScript for creating UX pages as well. So there are lots of frameworks on NPM also that are available as packages for you to reuse. Would love for you to create a framework and contribute it back into the ecosystem as well. And going on to github.com and just searching. So if you go and search for UX frameworks, if you search for responsive pages like React and stuff like that, you'll get a lot of code and projects your way. So the search mechanism on GitHub itself actually will connect you not only to projects, but it will also connect you with different developers. So a lot of developers would have put UX as a key skill on their profile. So the search result will also show you that. So you're free to connect with them and start talking about, hey, I looked at your code and you did it this way. I would love to learn how you did it. So that's also, a way a lot of developers interact on GitHub.
Okay. Shilpa?
Manish, one of our viewers wanted to know what's GitHub's take on bug bounty hunting in open source code?
Interesting point. So there, bug bounty hunting, a lot of organizations do. With thousands of open source projects living on GitHub, it actually gives us a very unique perspective and opportunity to look at what's happening in the open source code. As I was mentioning earlier, we've released a lot of tools to help identify CVEs and a lot of bugs that are out there. In fact, I would point all of the viewers to a product of GitHub called Advanced Security. You can go to lgtm.com. So LGTM stands for looks good to me. So whenever you're developing software, if somebody reviews and approves, LGTM. So you go to lgtm.com, you can actually point to any open source public repository. So, in the URL and on lgtm.com, once you go there and connect, it will run through the entire code and identify any CVEs that might exist or bugs and issues that might exist and recommend changes and suggestions for you as well. And many developers actually use that tool for the bug bounty that you talked about. So these tools, the security frameworks that GitHub has created and made available to the open source community actually helps. And we take this as a responsibility on our side because open source is fundamental to what we do. We want to make the software supply chain more secure. So we keep on releasing software and code for that. When I used to code, I don't code anymore that much. I can still code, but not that much. But we used to have Stack Overflow issues, right? And they still exist. Decades and decades of coding, they still exist. So why isn't it that it goes away? Because there are different ways of how software is written by different people. So the security technologies that we made available to developers actually check for false positives. They also check and see, okay, if this is a genuine issue of a Stack Overflow that might come, right? They start giving suggestions on how they should be writing that function. And this really helps shift this whole security to the left, which is in the development life cycle itself. When somebody is writing code, the system being able to point out, hey, the way you've written this function in this library has a potential Stack Overflow. You might think of it doing it this way. So even before it reaches testing and eventually to the end customer, you've been able to identify security issues. So very good question. I would implore you to go to lgtm.com and just play around with any open source library you want to check.
Manish, it's a question that keeps arising. I mean, these languages, you mentioned that Python has become very popular now across Java. I think languages like Go and Kotlin and all are doing well. But these ups and downs keep happening. Is it easy for developers who got used to, let's say, Python to, let's say, Python is no longer very popular, shift to something else very quickly? How does it work?
I think there are a couple of things, Sujit. One is definitely the comfort, right? What I am comfortable in working on. So that's the first point. The reason Python has become so popular is because it has always been a conversational development language, right? Unlike C, C++, Java, where you need to know a lot of syntax related stuff, Python is conversational. With the advancement in technology over the last few years, with applications being created rapidly, everybody having access to information, right? Python is a very good way for people to get started. And that's partly the reason why a lot of first-time coders are starting with Python, right? So it goes back to, on what you're comfortable with, right? And what you can use to achieve the objective that you want. A lot of the embedded code that is being written for, let's say, for hardware systems, right? So software developer would be very keen to use C, C++, and they continue to do it that way, right? So it's a mix and match, but bottom line that I have seen is what are you comfortable with?
Okay. Shilpa?
We have a question from Rudula. She is asking, as a fresh college graduate, if she's looking to pursue a career in business analytics, what would be a good starting point on GitHub?
Business analytics. So I think two parts here. If you are an engineering graduate, are you looking at getting into the details? So you would go out and start exploring the data models that are out there. There are lots of AI ML projects that are also available on GitHub that you can start looking at. So if that's the path, that can help you. If you're coming from a non-software background and you're looking at business analytics, then probably GitHub might not be the right thing for you. You should start looking at a lot of the other resources that are out there, which become domain specific, right? So business analytics is very domain specific. So I remember the previous question that was talking about it. The KPIs, the models that are very specific to healthcare would be very different from oil and gas, right? So for example, so if you're looking at a career in business analytics, you would look at what kind of domain should I also go into if you're non-engineering background. If you're engineering, then those are the resources available on GitHub for you to reuse. Just go and search, Mridula, just go on to github.com and make a search.
Similar questions around this is from Harsha. With AI ML being touted as a future of software development, how can I use GitHub to upskill in these areas?
Again, it's sort of like the same question. You should go and explore. One thing that I can start pointing out for a lot of the viewers also is there's a bot-based training framework from GitHub. So you go to lab.github.com, and it's a bunch of training courses that are available for software developers to get started on different technologies, right? Things like inner sourcing, also fundamentals of how do you want to use Git, how do you explore analytics models, how do you explore CI/CD through actions. So it is bot-based, right? So when you're doing software development, you're not watching videos. So the bot will actually wait for you to write that code before you move to the next step. So I would also urge you to go to lab.github.com to start exploring a lot of the courses that are available there. I think Sujit's network froze.
Yeah. So Maneesh, if you can talk about, the GitHub Hackathon grant program, right? What is the kind of traction that is seen in India? What's the excitement among students, especially? If you can share, when is the next edition coming up?
So it's already running. Excuse me. It's already running. I think, with the COVID situation, with all the institutions not being open right now, that is probably the reason for the delay, but it's available. So it's not a cyclical thing. It is always on. You can actually go to the education.github.com and apply for the hackathon grant. Right? So obviously you need to be an institution. We need to understand what the hackathon that you want to run, and then we would support it. So, as the pandemic clears out, I'm looking forward to a lot of applications. Till then, all the students, I would really, really like you to go and apply for the student developer pack. It's a great way to learn, right? So the questions that were coming on UI, UX, on analytics, there are a bunch of tools available from different providers of technology that you can start exploring. Again, you have to be a student. So professional developers, sorry.
So there must be heroes in the community who probably are, everybody must be asking their opinions and things like that. What do they do? Do they respond? How does this work?
They do. So in the education world, we do have what we call as GitHub campus experts. So, they are students who are very active in software, and becoming a GitHub campus expert is actually a very long drawn process. Not everybody becomes a campus expert. So you go through the process, you explain what you've been doing, and then that individual actually goes out and talks to the community on behalf of GitHub. So they are our actual, stars, the heroes that you talked about. So these GitHub campus experts are not only talking about GitHub or maintaining GitHub for their institution, We're actually going out and talking to the community as well. And that's the whole soul of GitHub. Community is the soul of GitHub. We always look at how can we enable the community to go out and do things. It's not about, what can Maneesh do himself. It's about how can we enable the community to do it.
They continue that role even after they cease to be students, is it?
No, they don't. That's
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Only. So what about for non-students? There are similar roles?
We don't have that yet. But what does happen is a lot of the profiles and projects get starred. So if you go on to GitHub, profiles as well as projects will have stars. So you can actually look at how popular somebody is in the community by looking at the number of stars that they've got. The other indicator of how popular a project or an individual is by the number of forks. So forks is a way for you to...
Number of what, sorry?
Fork, F-O-R-K, fork.
Oh, okay.
So if you get code and I like it and I want to use it in a certain way in my project, I will actually fork it and try to develop on top of it. So if a lot of people are forking your code, means it's very popular, right? So that's also a great indicator of, how strong you are in the community.
Okay. Shilpa, are there any more questions?
Yes, we have, sorry.
I was just
saying,
sorry, Maneesh. I was just saying, stay tuned.
Stay tuned, okay.
Okay.
We have a question from Kaushik. He wants to know how his work on GitHub can get noticed and attract eyeballs from the wider community and recruiters.
So I think recruiter point would be when you put your handle on your resume. That's one way. And a lot of recruiters have also told me that they go and search your profile. So the search facility, the functionality that I was talking about earlier for searching on profile, anybody can go and say, Bangalore developer AI. So whatever you have on your profile, it will pop up as a search result. So a lot of the recruiters do it that way. To get your work to be noticed, I think, that it's that same question that Sujit asked earlier. It's about other people discovering your code. So there are lots of tips and tricks on how you are tagging your project, how you're tagging your code to get discovered. It's a fuzzy logic, right? If somebody's searching for UX models, so your code should have all of those tags so that they're able to discover it. And definitely if it is of value to people will start starring, right? So it's like giving a thumbs up approval to your code. And that's how it becomes a community thing and people start adopting it more. Also, whenever you are also contributing, right? So you are engaged. So it's not only about, I have written a code, I have put it on GitHub, now I'm waiting for people to come in, right? The whole point is you should be collaborating with others too. So as you collaborate and connect with more people within the community, whether it is, in Bangalore, in India, or across India, you're actually starting to showcase what you've been doing. And there are many developers in India who've been very active. I have joined lots of, GitHub community sessions, not related to India. It could be happening for the Australia team, for the Australia community. And I've seen the India community members join in as well, right? And they're talking about what projects that they're doing here. So I think being in a community is also about being active. So just what I'm trying to say is just by putting code or creating profile doesn't mean that, you're set. You have to engage with the community. It's a contribution process. It's a two-way street, as I would put it.
What took GitHub so long to come to India? To set up an office. I'm sure there are a lot of people participating, but still to set up an office. And
it's always about timing. I think, given where we were and what exciting stuff was happening already in India, we were here. But the way the platform's been built, Sujit, it's always on, right? It's a distributed platform. We have, even for GitHub, all our employees are remote all over the world. So we always had a remote first policy. And the fact that even without us having that office in India, and India is the third largest community, just goes to show how the developers are still engaged, right? We have open source projects coming out of India. We have developer communities on India. We have customers who are using the platform for creating their own software, right? It was always there. And we felt that we can accelerate this whole process by being closer to the community. If I just look at education, there are thousands of schools and colleges in India where we can have significant impact for the next generation of software coders, right? And with us being here, we can do that faster. So without waiting for somebody to reach out to us, we can actually be here, go to the community, go to institutions, go to customers, and help them in this acceleration. With what's happening in India, with the whole digital transformation, the leapfrog in technology, I think it's, I always talk about product market fit. I'm sitting in the world's largest product market fit validation that could ever be. Sitting in.
Shilpa, more questions?
Yes, we have a question from Prasad. He wants to know, is there been some change in GitHub's focus or strategy post the Microsoft acquisition?
That's a very good question. Answer is no. If you think about it, and I started off with that same point, the reason GitHub is GitHub with 50 million developers is we give the choice to the developer. We will always be a tool, a language, platform, cloud agnostic provider. So we have, thousands of millions of developers who would want to deploy onto an AWS cloud, or they would want to deploy into a Google cloud or into a HashiCorp instance. So the fact that the choice exists for every developer is why GitHub exists. So we haven't changed. We're still available. Yes, Microsoft is a great partner for GitHub as well. It definitely helps in areas for accelerating the mission that GitHub has of making it the best platform for developers.
Government is the big user, is it? I mean, in India, many governments are building on open source, I think, isn't it?
They are. So a lot of the everybody. So it's an open platform, as I mentioned, Sujit. So if they want to open source project, they can go to GitHub and do it. If they want to look at software, a lot of reuse happens. Globally, we do have a lot of federal organizations who use GitHub for their software development lifecycle too.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the points on the enterprise side is a lot of the enterprises want their code to not be on a public cloud because that's IP, right? So GitHub also gives that choice of deploying, a GitHub in your private walled garden, right? Where it still connects to the public cloud to be able to get, all the benefits of the open source pieces that I talked about, but you have a private walled garden where you're managing your own code in your own data center or in your own private cloud. So that choice is also available for anybody who wants to do it that way.
Okay.
I think that's something that not a lot of your viewers would know. GitHub is available to enterprises to deploy on their own private network.
Yeah. Okay. Shilpa?
No more questions. Just one update from GitHub on, last when we had met, you spoke about how GitHub plans to hire 200 employees in India by this year end. So how far have you progressed on that journey? If you can help us with some numbers.
We have, I won't be able to share with you numbers, that 200 number still remains by the end of the calendar. But I've hired a lot of people. I have been, I can't tell you how exhausted I am over the last few months, working with the community, with customers. I've been waiting for the team to come on board. Many of them have started to come on board. They're ramping up with me. And over the next few months, many more are going to be coming on board. So we're on track. I'm excited to build the team here in India to support the community and customers. Never been so busy. I've never been so busy.
It's never been so busy.
Hey,
we
great.
have one question.
Oh, you have? Okay, go on.
One question from Ram Reddy. So he wants to know, with the current pandemic, how is it going to impact the IT industry? He wants to know your take on this.
So my take on this is, it's always an opportunity, right? One is, yes, there is a speed bump given the pandemic, and it's not restricted to any country or industry. It's a global speed bump, right? And as I said, it's a speed bump. Things will continue, but at the same time, everything is going to get reimagined. when we walked into the pandemic, the entire world realized that we were not ready for it. Right? Systems, processes, infrastructure was not ready for what we got into. And who knows what else is out there. So I think it's a great opportunity for the whole industry to sort of transform into the new world. Think of it like a new firmware upgrade. The world is rebooting with a new firmware, and this new firmware is going to take care of future such things. So how do we create applications that enable contactless engagements, right? This whole concept that you're seeing of remote work, what we're doing today, right? There is going to be more of it, but how do you make it more collaborative, more engaged, right? Education, healthcare, these industries are definitely going to get transformed with what just happened. So I think for a software developer, I repeat myself by saying it's the perfect job to be in. There's going to be so much of opportunity to create the new world that it is super exciting.
More, Shilpa?
Yeah, that's it from my side, Sujit. Yeah.
Great. I think we exceeded the 1 hour. Thanks so much, Manish. It was wonderful talking to you. Sure, our viewers would have enjoyed it. Thanks a lot again. Hope to have more interactions like this in the future.
Look forward to it as well, Sujit and Shilpa. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for all the viewers for joining so late in the evening. I hope you stay safe and take care.
Thank you,
All the best.
Manish.
I'm sure GitHub will do exceedingly well in India.
Thank you for your
All the
time.
best. Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.